Welcome, my YouTube family. Remember, like, subscribe, and share. So let's begin. We're going to jump into one of the biggest debates in the United States and one of the major issues affecting voters and affecting people's personal life is the issue of abortion. So, my job here isn't to debate with you or necessarily persuade you into deciding whether you're pro choice or anti abortion. I'm just here to inform you on the background and the case law of Roe v. Wade and later the decision that recently overturned Roe v. Wade, decades of legal precedent. So let's dive on into it. Now, it is important to remember and have a quick flashback to the fact that Roe v. Wade and subsequently Dobbs v. Jackson was also very controversial. You would be literally picking a side. There is no in between in this matter. So let's take a quick flashback down memory lane real quick before we dive into the background of the case.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government. Thus, the anti-abortion laws of 46 states were rendered unconstitutional. More on this story from George Herman.
Yes, you heard that news anchor correct. It was almost a near unanimous decision with the Supreme Court to implement Roe v. Wade and debunk many states' laws that had anti-abortion laws on the books. And just in a second, I'm about to show you back then some of the people's opinion on it versus today.
The mother. The newly liberalized abortion law brought immediate reaction.
I think that to raise the dignity of woman and give her freedom of choice in this area is an extraordinary event. And I think that January 22nd, 1973 would be an historic day.
In this instance, the Supreme Court has withdrawn protection for the human rights of unborn children, and it is teaching people that abortion is a rather innocuous procedure provided that there are proper legal safeguards. I think that the judgment of the court will do a great deal to tear down the respect previously accorded human life in our culture.
One of today's plaintiffs.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, this was always a divisive issue that divided conservatives and liberals, Democrats, Republicans, even families, women and men along multiple different lines, whether they be economic or religion. Now that we have an idea of where the country was back in 1973, I want to dive into the details of this case. Let's start first with the background, then go into a little bit more of what the ruling did, and then we'll dive into where we're at now with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. All right, now that we have that out the way, let's go into the background of the case. The U.S. Supreme Court established in the Roe v. Wade ruling a federal constitutional right to abortion, a precedent that stood for nearly 50 years until it was overturned in 2022. Now, the origins of the case: the plaintiff, Norma McCorvey, a pregnant woman in Texas, sought an abortion in 1969 because Texas law only permitted the procedure to save the mother's life. She was denied access and eventually sued under the pseudonym Jane Roe, hence the name Roe v. Wade. Now, the defendant in this case was Henry Wade, the district attorney of Dallas County, who was the official responsible for enforcing the state's anti-abortion statutes. The legal representation in the case was attorneys Sarah Wedding and Linda Coffey, who filed the suit on McCorvey's, aka Roe, behalf, arguing that the law violated her constitutional right to privacy. The ruling came after intense debate in 1973, where the Supreme Court ruled on January 22, 1973, the court had ruled 7-2 in favor of Roe, striking down the Texas law. The majority, led by Justice Harry Blackburn, he held on a constitutional basis that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment provides a fundamental right to privacy that covers a woman's decision to have an abortion. This is the framework that the justices use to determine their outcome. The trimester framework to balance the woman's rights above the state's interest in protecting health and potential life. The court established a timeline. The first trimester, states could not restrict abortion beyond minimum medical safeguards in the first trimester. Second trimester, states could regulate the procedure in ways reasonably related to the mother's health. Third trimester, once the fetus reached viability, the state could prohibit abortion except to save the mother's life or health. This overturned years of precedent that made sure that women had the right to an abortion. This was a huge thing back then, as it is today. Now, I'm going to flash forward to today. First, I'm going to start with a little bit of a background to the backlash of the overturning of Roe v. Wade back in 2022. And then we're going to dive into the Dobbs v. Jackson case.
Getting an abortion is not easy. Making that decision is not easy. It's not something people do lightly. It's not something that you can just do.
The Supreme Court rules to overturn Roe v. Wade abortion laws, which marks the first time in U.S. history that the court has taken away a constitutional right, and celebs are speaking out after the decision.
Incredibly important.
Former First Lady Michelle Obama took to Twitter with a lengthy message, saying she's heartbroken, especially for future generations. In her letter, Michelle wrote, quote, "This horrifying decision will have devastating consequences, and it must be a wake-up call, especially to the young people who will bear its burden."
After a pivotal day for America, we leave you with what Americans were saying today as the course of the country was rewritten by the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court has now overturned Roe v. Wade.
I feel betrayed and I feel lost. I feel like I'm 19 years old. I've had my first year of college. I shouldn't be worried about my rights being taken away from me. And it hurts that I have little hope for the future.
I've had people in my family have abortions, and they have felt the regret years and years down the line. If Roe v. Wade wouldn't have been legal inside of the United States, I would have family members that I don't have today.
It's shocking. This is something that women should have a right to. I just don't. I can't.
Every child deserves life. Human rights start at conception and end at natural death, and that is what I'm going to fight for until the day that I die.
This is the first time the Supreme Court has ever granted a constitutional right, which it did so when Roe was decided in 1973, and then took it away, a popular right that was widely recognized.
Now, this was a monumental shift by the Supreme Court, which I do want to note has gotten more conservative over the years due to a number of reasons since the original decision of Roe v. Wade. That plays an important role. Now, before I jump into the background of the Dobbs v. Jackson decision, I did want to make an important note that, as I mentioned earlier, my job isn't to tell you to support abortion, to be pro-life or pro-choice. I'm just giving you a brief history of both cases and the impact it has had on American society, and also just to give you an idea of what the legal framework both courts used in their decisions in these cases. Now let's get into the background. All right, let's dive into the background of the case. Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization, 2022. It was a Supreme Court case that officially overturned Roe v. Wade, ending the federal constitutional right to abortion and returning the authority to regulate or ban the procedure to individual states. At the heart of the issue, so the law, the main part of this issue is the case originated in Mississippi with the Gestational Age Act of 2018, which prohibited nearly all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. The only exception to the law was the law only allowed exceptions for medical emergency or severe fetal abnormalities. Now, the conflict with the precedent was under the previous Roe and Casey standards. States were forbidden from banning abortion before fetal viability, roughly 24 weeks. Mississippi's 15-week ban was a direct challenge to this long-standing viability line. It's important to note the procedural history. The initial challenge was Jackson's Women's Health Organization, the only abortion clinic in Mississippi at the time, sued state health officer Thomas Dobbs immediately after the bill was signed. The lower court's ruling was both the federal court and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down the law, stating it was flatly unconstitutional under existing Supreme Court precedent. The Supreme Court finally reviewed it, and Mississippi appealed to the Supreme Court, eventually asking the justice to not just uphold their law, but to completely overrule Roe v. Wade entirely. In 2022, the Supreme Court gave its ruling. On June 24th, 2022, the court ruled in a 6-3 to uphold the Mississippi law and 5-4 to overturn Roe and Casey. The majority of the opinion was led by Justice Samuel Alito, who wrote that the Constitution makes no reference to abortion and that no such right is deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition. The impact was felt almost immediately. The ruling triggered numerous state laws that immediately banned abortion and removed the federal undue burden standard, allowing states to set any abortion policy they choose. Now, it is important to note that this was a very divisive decision, and this has many people divided, not only just along political lines, but also economic lines and also family lines as well. This is an unfortunate circumstance that just honestly just has to be dealt with. Now, I can give you my opinion and my personal belief when it comes to abortion and the right to choose or not, but my main point in making this first part of the video is just to get your viewpoint and your standpoint on how you feel. Do you feel like I informed you correctly on both cases? And also give me your opinion in the comments. Tell me, how do you feel about pro-choice or abortion bans or people having access to abortions or not? Leave a comment and remember to like, subscribe, and share.